if you have intelligence that's millions or billions of years old, even thousands of years old, you have to think what they may have developed into. And they may have developed into, post-biologicals, but also maybe even beyond that into something that has characteristics that we typically think of, a God having characteristics. But the difference is that it's not supernatural. It's all natural part of cosmic evolution. You may have very advanced intelligences out there which can do things that we would consider godlike. Of course, we don't know this for sure, but I think it's entirely possible, and a cosmotheology would have to take that into account, as well as various ethical issues. Astroethics is another one of the new sort of buzzwords in astrobiology. In other words, how do you deal with the extraterrestrials out there? Certainly not with an anthropocentric. If we try to deal with extraterrestrials in an anthropocentric way, that's probably a recipe for disaster, because anthropocentrism means that we're the center of everything.
We're number one, yeah.
Number
Sure.
one, we probably are not. So you have to develop a cosmocentric ethic and deal with extraterrestrials in a way that's beneficial to them as well as to us, and to the universe as a whole.
And welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness. It is Luciano here speaking as your host as usual. Welcome back. Welcome back to our regular listener, and welcome aboard if you are a new listener. Quick reminder for anybody listening here, if you haven't already, please rate us on any podcast platform. In fact, on the podcast platform that you listen to us on, and feel free to share with your family and friends. That is how we have been growing, and it's been a wonderful thing. We have listeners from all around the world, even non-Anglo world, actually, which is pretty exciting for us. Last thing I want to do is suggest, if you are intrigued by the path that we are taking in our conversations, and with the actual content of the conversations that we're trying to have with our listeners, feel free to check out how you can support us as well. Obviously, your auditory companionship is number one for us, but we are a charity, non-for-profit and a charity, and we also accept donations through the website, and you can see where that is as well. That's on behindgreatness.org. You can see all the steps there. And while you're there, I implore you to visit our content library of discussions. So we've had almost 150 so far recorded, and many more to go. We've only been at it 3 years. It's felt like 3 weeks. We're on a mission to spend a long time doing this because it's fun. And we're not going to have any less fun today with the guest that we have. His name is Stephen J. Dick, and Stephen has served as the NASA Chief Historian and Director of the NASA History Office from 2003 to 2009. Prior to this, he was an astronomer and historian of science at the U.S. Naval Observatory for more than 2 decades. In 2013, he testified before the United States Congress on the subject of astrobiology. For 2011, 2012, he held the Charles A. Lindbergh Chair in Aerospace History at the National Air and Space Museum. He is the author or editor of 25 books, most recently Space, Time, and Aliens, collected works on cosmos and culture. Now it's in 2020. He's a recipient of the NASA Exceptional Service Medal, the Navy Meritorious Civil Service Medal, and the NASA Group Achievement Award for his work on astrobiology. He has been elected a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a Fellow of the American Astronomical Society. He also has a minor planet named after him. Minor planet is it 6544 or do you say 6544?
6544.
So minor planet 6544, Stephen Dick, was named in his honor. And you can visit him at his website. You can visit more of his work and his bio at his website at stephenjdick.com. Thanks for coming on board, Stephen.
Happy to be here.
So Stephen or Steve? What can we use?
Steve is fine.
Okay, Steve, great. You've been a sports, Steve. We've been at this appointment making for the recording. So thank you for being patient.
Right.
We learned about you as many a recent guest through Diana Pasolka, and we spoke to Diana. Our guests can visit. I forget what number, but it's probably a couple of months ago now that we had her on the show. Check out her episode. That was pivotal in some of the understanding for us as well on people, especially in the United States, who have been involved in exploring everything and anything that we're not able to hear, the listener ourselves. And you've contributed quite a bit to astronomy and the history of astronomy and astrobiology. So I'm not going to pretend to know the definitions of many things. So I'm warning you, Steve, that I might be asking you some definitions along the way. So not just for me, but for obviously for the listener. So let's start off with actually a definition right now. What is the difference between astronomy and astrobiology?
Well, astronomy is a very broad subject. Anything about anything in the cosmos, planets, stars, galaxies, the whole sort of menagerie of things out there in outer space. And astrobiology focuses in on the possibility that we live in a universe that's not only dead planets, stars, and galaxies, but also there may be life out there. In fact, I wrote a book called The Biological Universe, as opposed to the physical universe. The physical universe being, just the things that have come from cosmic evolution, like planets, stars, and galaxies, and the biological universe being the idea that the universe is full of life. So the difference is that astrobiology is a subset of astronomy, but it's also a subset of biology, which is what makes it so interesting. On almost anything, chemistry, biology, astronomy, or the social sciences and humanities, which I've written about, or ethics, astroethics. And there's even something now called astroanthropology. And as I say, one of the great things is when you go to these meetings on astrobiology, you have a broad array of people from all these different disciplines communicating with each other.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a definition I didn't expect to ask you. What is astroanthropology?
Anthropology, deals with cultures and cultural evolution. And so if we do find extraterrestrials out there, anthropologists should certainly be part of the conversation because they're used to studying and dealing with other cultures. We have no idea what we're going to find out there if there is extraterrestrial intelligence, but anthropologists have been engaged for a few decades now, but things are really starting to gel in terms of anthropological interest in outer space, not just in astrobiology, but other things having to do with outer space too.
What's become really interesting is they use the word culture here just a moment ago. Reading through some of your material, you have not been shy about discussing culture as part of the discussion in studying the universe, which is kind of refreshing because those are concepts I think I understand. So it made it relatable to my exercise in reading it. You did mention something, and so we're going to skip around, I think, a little bit. You said the study of astrobiology in Europe versus the study of astrobiology in the US is better at integrating societal issues into the roadmap. Please elaborate that. What does that mean? What have they been doing?
In the United States, since the late 90s, there's been something called the NASA Astrobiology Institute, which now goes under another name. But when the roadmap back in the 90s was formulated for NASA about what to do over the next decade in astrobiology, it was mainly from the point of view of the physical and biological sciences. And there was a group of us that lobbied for societal impact issues to be included. And it was in a very general way that stated that there's a great societal interest in this subject. But one of the specific goals was not to study that. And so there was no funding for doing that. Whereas in Europe, when they, in the last decade or so, organized the European Astrobiological Society, one of their founding principles was that this is something that should be studied. And so they have had considerably more force behind their studies. Now, I should say, though, that in the United States, that has improved in the last decade or so, and NASA in particular now has what's called the Bloomberg Chair in Astrobiology at the Library of Congress, which is specifically supposed to look at humanistic aspects of astrobiology. And I served as that chair a few years ago and wrote a book based on that. So slowly, I'm just saying that it's been sort of a more slow process in the United States to recognize the importance of humanities and social sciences than it was in Europe, where they said from the beginning that this is something we want to study in addition to the physical and biological science part of it.
You also said, also in the last discussion that we had, or in our first discussion that we had, that there are three possible outcomes of cosmic evolution.
Right.
You said that there's a physical universe, the idea that there is a physical universe, a biological universe, and a post-biological universe.
Right.
When I did my follow-up reading, you are not in the camp of believing that we just live in a physical universe. Just to quote you here in what I read, it seems to me very unlikely that we live in a purely physical universe in which humans are the sole inhabitants deserving the unique attention of the superior intelligence. I guess in basic Christian terms or in Catholic terms, because I grew up Catholic, I think you did as well. And your sister's a Benedictine
Benedictine nun. That's right. In cases where siblings have different directions.
No kidding. So, what direction did you go into based on these three viewpoints?
Well, I've already mentioned the physical universe, planets, stars, and galaxies, the biological universe, which is life on those a lot of those planets, of which we now know there are at least 5,000, some of them habitable. And basically, if you extrapolate, every star has planets, some of which are habitable. We don't yet know if they are actually inhabited, which is the next big step. So that's the biological universe. And then the post-biological universe is where you have to take culture into account. So you have in cosmic evolution, if you look at the broad sweep of the history of the universe, which is 13.8 billion years old, you have astronomical evolution to start with, then you have biological evolution, certainly on Earth, and we think probably in outer space. But the third possibility is what I call a post-biological universe. And that's if you think in the long term, beyond just the biology. I have argued in several articles that we live in a universe which is full of artificial intelligence because you have to take cultural evolution into account. So that's what I mean by the post-biological universe. And we can talk more about that if you want to, but if you want to talk in terms of theological things, I've written on what I call cosmotheology, which is a theology that talks about that incorporates everything that we know about the universe. And the bottom line on that for me is that we should no longer deal with the supernatural. I have five or six principles of cosmotheology, starting with the idea that we're not physically central in the universe. That's obvious these days. We're not. They used to think we were physically central. Another principle is that we're not biologically or mentally or intellectually central, which is open to argument because we don't know that for sure. But if you believe in a biological universe, then we would not be central. Another principle would be that we probably are near the bottom of the chain of being in terms of where we are in our development, because in that 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, life and intelligence could have evolved not just thousands or millions, but billions of years ago. And so my point is that you have to take into account cultural evolution. So another one of those principles of cosmotheology would be that we have to have new ideas, be open to new ideas about what God might be, or what we traditionally have called God.
What are your ideas on that?
Well, if you don't believe in the supernatural, that means that you have to think in terms of cosmic evolution. So if you have intelligence that's millions or billions of years old, even thousands of years old. You have to think what they may have developed into, and they may have developed into post biologicals, but also maybe even beyond that into something that has characteristics that we typically think of, uh, God having characteristics. But the difference is that it's not supernatural. It's all natural part of cosmic evolution. You may have very advanced intelligences out there which can do things that uh, we would consider godlike. Um, of course, we don't know this for sure, but I think it's entirely possible, and a cosmotheology would have to take that into account, as well as various ethical issues. Astroethics is another one of the new sort of buzzwords in astrobiology. In other words, how do you deal with the extraterrestrials out there? Certainly not with an anthropocentric. If we try to deal with extraterrestrials in an anthropocentric way, that's probably a recipe for disaster, because anthropocentrism means that we're the center of everything.
We're number one. Yeah.
Number
Sure.
one, we probably are not. So you have to develop a cosmocentric ethic and deal with extraterrestrials in a way that's beneficial to them as well as to us, and to the universe as a whole.
Amazing. Okay. So you said a few things I want to go back to here. So we talked about, or I mentioned post-biological in your readings, that third worldview. And then you just mentioned beyond post-biological. So just to set it out, post-biological viewpoint, and I'm just going on what I had read.
Post-biological.
Post-biological refers to how culture has evolved to have, over billions of years or whatever time frame, to have us live in a universe that's dominated by a technology that we don't yet understand here today.
Well, it's dominated by artificial intelligence, and there's been a lot of talk lately about artificial intelligence and how it's advancing here on Earth. But what you have to realize is that those civilizations out there have been through this stage long, long ago, and so the idea is that they would already have gone to post-biological intelligence. There may still be biological intelligence around, but you could posit that for Darwinian reasons, the ones that are more intelligent out-survive the biologicals.
So would we be, excuse me for getting so rudimentary here, because it's the only way I can ask these questions. So is then our AI, like right now, our nascent AI, is it baby AI, or is it a parallel AI that's happening?
This is just baby. This is just baby AI. We talk about artificial intelligence, but what we don't have yet is an artificial general intelligence. Artificial intelligence can do various things, like this chat GPT that you've heard of, these various chatbots.
Yep.
They can do amazing things now, but that's not, they can't do what we do yet in a very general way, a general kind of intelligence, and having emotions and all that sort of a thing, although there have been some eerie reports of some eerie things that they've said. But again, you can imagine cultural evolution. If you think about cultural evolution on the Earth, in terms of biological evolution, 10,000 years ago, we weren't any different than we are now. But if you think about cultural evolution, we're extremely different than we were 10,000 years ago.
Sure.
And so if you project that into outer space, what's the case going to be? Now, some people say that's a pretty far out idea, the idea of a post-biological universe full of artificial intelligence. But my point is, it may not be far out enough, and that there may be something beyond the post-biological artificial intelligence, something spiritual, or something we just don't understand yet. And there've been various science fiction stories about this kind of thing too.
Beyond post-biological, I guess the underlying assumption there is that there is a civilization, or there are civilizations that have been existing before and beyond us that we cannot sense with our faculties now. Is that the underlying assumption?
Well, that's right. I mean, we certainly have not found any yet, and that's what the whole SETI endeavors about, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which started in the modern era way back with Frank Drake, who unfortunately recently died just last year. But some of your readers or listeners will be familiar with the Drake equation, which has to do with astronomical, biological, and cultural evolution in an attempt to estimate the number of civilizations, the number of technological civilizations in our galaxy. And, some of the terms are not very well known. Some are better known now than they used to be, like the number of planets out there. But people come up with various different numbers in terms of the number of technological civilizations in our galaxy. Some people say in the millions, and some people say somewhere in between there, and some people say just one. I always say you have to be careful, or you're going to prove that we don't exist. But obviously, we're here because we did have to jump through a lot of hoops to get here. Through the biological. It's hard to get origins of life. It's even harder, some people say, to get the origins of intelligence. And there you get into the problem of what do you mean exactly by intelligence?
Yeah. Well, do you believe that we are only just our bodies?
Only just our bodies? You mean? Well, I'm not. If what you're asking, I'm not a what we would call a reductionist. In other words, in terms of being, there's nothing aside from physics and chemistry. I think there could be more. We just don't know for sure. And certainly there's a spiritual aspect to humans. There has been throughout history, and you get into various discussions about what the implications would be if we found extraterrestrial life. Some people, there's been quite a bit of written on this, because I've talked about cosmotheology. There's a broader field called astrotheology, where people have gone into detail about what are the possible implications if we find intelligence out there, the implications for theology and religion on the earth. And of course, the implications are different for each religion and theology, but especially difficult, I think, for a Christian theology where you have redemption, incarnation, and that sort of thing. There's literature on that subject.
Yeah, we had Guy Consolmagno, as you know, on the podcast.
Yes, I know Guy. Yes.
Yeah.
A book called "Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial?"
Well, that's why I mentioned it, right? So we just talked about it ultra briefly on the episode, his book. And the reason why I mentioned it felt like when I learned that the Pope Francis, the current Pope, mentioned it. I don't know if it was in a press conference or whatever. It was like just kind of a side answer to a question from a reporter, that he would baptize an alien. Why would he say that? Is he trying to get in front of something? It's like, am I not understanding what scientists are actually discussing? And so I guess energetically, this is what brought me to start talking to people like you on the podcast. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm not sure how much the Pope had thought about that before he said it, but Guy Consolmagno's answer, I think, is that to the question, would you baptize an extraterrestrial, is only if it asked, which is a big improvement over what they did back in the 16th century when the Spanish came over and tried to force people they were evangelizing, trying to force people to join the Catholic Church. So it's easy to say he would baptize an extraterrestrial, but what about the doctrines of redemption and incarnation, which are very specific to the earth? Do you have more than one incarnation? Do you have planet hopping Jesus, going to different planets?
Sure. He's got to save everybody, right?
That's not so easy to. And there's no consensus on that in among Catholics or among Christians. There has been historically quite a bit of discussion about it. I think it's very interesting discussion, but it's not an easy thing to resolve.
No, and I think you would agree it's a cultural thing too, right? Because I mean, like you, I grew up Catholic, so Jesus was our savior. But Jesus, as per, we had a friar on, a wonderful gentleman from Texas, but he's also a channeler. He reminded me, he goes, "No, Jesus was an extraterrestrial." He channels beings through they appear to him in his dreams, and then he has sessions with him with his prayer group, and they actually these are beings who are trying to go over to the other side, as he describes them. Interesting conversation. But as I just mentioned, he also reminded me that Jesus was an extraterrestrial. So if Catholics are Christians, let's just say Christians, I'm not picking on anybody because this is part of my cultural upbringing too, not just religious upbringing. If we're open enough to believe and understand or know, choose your word, that an extraterrestrial came to Earth to save us, why can't we stay open-minded about the fact that he's not, or he can be the only extraterrestrial that we could ever know?
Well, it could be, but what about all the other extraterrestrials out there? Did he go around to all those other planets too?
Exactly.
I mean, if you have a cosmotheology without all those various doctrines, the problem is solved. You have a cosmocentric ethic. You have a cosmotheology, which only talks about religious naturalism. Which is whatever spiritual religious ideas you have to do with nature or with cosmic evolution. Then you don't have these problems of incarnation and redemption and all that sort of thing. And of course, people then ask, well, what's the source of morality then? And that's a long-standing question. Most people get their ideas of morality, their moral principles, from things like the Bible or the New Testament and that sort of thing. So if those are not divinely inspired, which I would argue, since I don't believe in the supernatural, then what's the source of your morality? I would say things like the golden rule: do unto others as others would do unto you. That sort of thing. You don't need a supernatural to posit that. And you can also draw spirituality and reverence from the universe itself, which a lot of us do, especially in astronomy, I think.
I get the sense that it's not that you don't believe in the supernatural, that you believe that the supernatural is probably misdefined.
I'm not sure what you mean about that exactly. I do not believe in the supernatural.
Well, okay. So, all right, that's fine. This is not a point of arguing. I'm trying to get at it, because you do have an open mind, and as the listeners just starting to find out here in the last 20 minutes or so, but you open yourself up to possibly being exposed to beings or civilizations, extraterrestrials, other intelligences that are far more advanced than we are,
right?
Just like how let's say a Christian or a Catholic might see what an angel might be. I mean, an angel defined by your worldview, by your opinion, could be something that is AI induced, something that we don't yet understand, but exists not as supernatural, but exists as something that we can't quite understand using our own faculties right now.
Well, that's right, but there's a huge difference. The difference is that in cosmotheology and in the superior intelligences are from a product of cosmic evolution, natural cosmic evolution, whereas angels and God and all of that, as traditionally spoken of, are supernatural. So that's a very, most people don't think that God evolved from, after, couldn't have evolved from 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, because God is the one, he was there before it all started, right? That's a big difference.
So let me add something. So I'm with you here, but let me add something else. The reason why I also asked that question is, I open myself up to listening to other folks, other scholars, people who have studied, spent a large part of their time in their lives studying this. And there's one scholar, I mentioned him to Diana Pasolka as well. His name is Mauro Bellino. He's an Italian. He's now learning English. I think he's in his 60s now. He's learning English because he wants his message out there in the Anglo world. But he's a biblical scholar, and he had been doing it for a couple of decades, I think. And he was learning original Hebrew, ancient Greek, and he came to the realization, using his words, that these stories the Old Testament stories were written about a particular family under the protection of generals that are extraterrestrials, but at the time seemed God-like. Very fascinating. And he doesn't make inferences. He uses the language that he's learned that's been mistranslated or not translated.
I'm not sure how you could prove that, though.
Well, right. So he's using so his source is the language that's being used.
Right.
And so he's put the stories together to understand that what in his scholarly opinion is that these were cosmic soldiers who were using humanity for whatever purposes.
Well, at least that's a natural explanation.
Right.
Not one that I would buy into without more evidence. But
sure, and his evidence is in the ancient script and the understanding of the ancient script.
That would sort of jibe with the ancient astronaut hypothesis of Eric von Däniken and all of this. Who Eric von Däniken said that there's evidence on Earth of ancient astronauts from various petroglyphs and all kinds of things. And of course, he's gotten to be a millionaire selling a lot of books.
Yeah,
saying,
of course.
Again, the evidence I think is not very good. I have an open mind on that, but I just would like to see the evidence in the same way that I have an open mind on UFOs or UAPs, as they're called these days, unidentified aerial phenomena. I'd love for them to be aliens, but I need some better proof. Is the point?
So we've had Ryan Graves on. I'm sure you've heard of Ryan Graves, U.S. Navy pilot, fighter pilot.
Yes,
right.
Yes. Right.
We had him on, and he has witnessed things in the air, and he's been very outspoken for the last several years about air safety out there, because even his superiors never answered his questions on what they were and what they are. So he has seen this craft that we can only call UFOs, UAP, because they're unidentified. Right. What are your thoughts there on what he has seen, the evidence that he's had visually and through his radar?
Well, I've written on the history of UFOs in the Biological Universe book and the abridgment Life on Other Worlds. I have a large chapter on UFOs, on UFO history, and I've always been of the opinion that the residue, 97% of UFOs can be explained, by astronomically or balloons or something. But the question is, what about those 3%? And I've always been of the opinion that those 3% really should be seriously studied. And so any evidence that we can get is good. But I would have to say that the evidence, including what Mr. Graves talks about, is not very good. I've seen all those Navy videos, and it's just not definitive evidence to me. People seem to be impressed that it came from the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and these pilots who say they have seen things, and even on the radars. Now, I haven't gone down into the details of the radar data, but I think in order to make a claim about them being, an extraterrestrial spacecraft or something, you have to have a lot more than a blurry picture, which a lot of people are impressed with, or even the radar data, which has also, I think, been questioned by skeptics. I'm, by the way, a member of the Galileo Project, the Harvard Galileo Project.
Wanted to get to that, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, which is seeks to find new evidence. They don't want to rehash the old evidence, which is what it's almost always done. People going over and over and over again over the old evidence, even the Navy evidence. But you have to remember, even on the Navy evidence, those instruments are not specialized to look for UFOs. They're specialized to look for enemy aircraft or something. So what you need is specialized equipment, and that's what the Galileo Project people in Harvard are doing. They're developing specialized equipment to scan the sky and look for something that's totally unexplained, not a fighter jet or something, which is what those U.S. Navy planes are looking for.
Yeah, so we've had Avi Loeb, as you know, an astronomer. So he's headed up the Galileo Project. So you're involved with Avi Loeb. Right. We had him on the podcast, and one of the things he said, very similar to you, he'd love he'd love for the Oumuamua to be technology of an ancient or of an alien civilization. He'd love to have that, but he wants to build tools to provide the evidence that that is what it is.
Exactly.
So, but he's open-minded about what it could be because he knows what it isn't.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. And I agree with that. And I think the people on the Galileo Project agree with that, that it's really counterproductive to go over and over and over old blurry photos and things. And that we really need to get new data, and that's what we're trying to do. And even NASA's become interested in it now. You know, NASA has a panel that's looking into whether or not they should study this more. And of course, the Pentagon and the Office of Intelligence is also looking at this, because it could be, you know, if these things really are spy balloons or drones or something, that's a national security issue. And so there's good reason from many different points of view to be looking at it. And I have to say that I'm, as the former NASA historian, I am surprised that NASA is finally getting into this, because they never have before wanted to touch the whole UFO thing. But I think it's a good thing. It is a scientific problem, and we should bring all the tools that we have to bear on that problem.
So you said, to go back to again, or to stay on rather, on the UFO thing. You mentioned to me that UFOs can be one of three things: alien spacecraft, physical phenomenon, or something else.
Right.
What could that something else be?
Well, national security. By physical phenomenon, I mean something that we don't understand. We're talking about the 3% residue here.
Mm-hmm.
If you can explain the other 97% by astronomy and whatever, but it could be some phenomenon, either physical or psychological or sociological, that we just don't understand yet. That would be interesting too. Or it could be national security, or it could be alien spacecraft. Any one of those would be very interesting and have all kinds of implications, although very different implications. The national security, if it's national security thing, that's a national security implication. But the alien spaceship, which is what most people are interested in, that would be an existential possible threat to humanity. I've just been reading, and some of your listeners will have heard of the famous trilogy written by Cixin Liu, the Chinese science fiction writer, called The Three Body Problem. And it's about a message which is sent from the Earth into outer space. This is what we call not SETI these days, but METI. Instead of searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, it's messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. And in this science fiction trilogy written by Cixin Liu, a message is sent with catastrophic results. Even though the message is intercepted at Proxima Centauri, or the Alpha Centauri system, which is the closest star system to us, just 4.3 light years away. But once they get the message, we've revealed our place, where we are, and they know that there's intelligence here, and they have the three body problem refers to there's three suns there. And so they're a very unstable climate with three suns, and they need to find a new place to live. So here they come, invasion fleet. So that's one implication of, if there are aliens out there, but I think there's a 50-50 chance that they're good or bad. We just don't know. The science fiction movies tend to say they're bad because there's a lot more action that way.
They sell tickets to the theaters. We get it, right? But going back to that something else, that number three, could that something else? I mean, you've discussed evidence here very clearly, and trying to figure out evidence and build the tools to find the evidence more definitively and so forth. Can we count subjective experience as part of that evidence collection, or the body of evidence?
Subjective experience in what way do you mean exactly?
Well, if Stephen had an out of body experience, or a visitation, quote unquote, or some sort of experience outside of his understanding of how his body works and how his body sees,
Right.
Can that be something that for you would be evidence of that something else?
Well, I've never had one of those that I know of.
Hmm. That you know of. Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, I'd be open to studying that. And I suppose some people do study that in the area of parapsychology and that sort of thing.
Yep.
But I've never seen, I mean, I'm totally open to the fact that there are things that we don't understand. Uh, but okay, we don't understand it. The task then is to try and understand it with whatever tools we had. Now, maybe you can say that maybe there are things we will never understand, and that could be true too. But I'm not sure what exactly you do with that. You certainly don't use that to say, um, that the aliens are here. For example, alien abduction. I'm not sure if you would call that an subjective experience. That's a real experience to the people who think they were abducted.
Sure.
But I, you know, the evidence for that is all not physical because you don't actually see the spaceships. You notice that all these people claim to have been abducted, but where are all the spaceships? Well, maybe they're the UFOs that we don't understand. I don't know,
Well,
but
maybe they exist there, but again, they can't be seen by the tools we have, including our sight and our auditory capabilities.
well,
Maybe
okay,
they're there.
yeah, but you have to be very careful there because if
Yeah.
it's something that we can't see or hear or detect with our senses, you can believe anything then. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a risk. You can believe anything, sure, but then, I mean, I'd like to believe that I'm more than just what my body offers as sensory capabilities.
right.
Um, I don't know. I can't prove it, but I know I have some experiences, personal experiences that have me ask the questions and search. I mean, that's part of the reasons why we reach out to people like you, because you actively search, right?
Right. Well, this is one of the reasons why it would be great, if the SETI searches were successful, if we can contact extraterrestrials and actually communicate with them, which is another question. If we can do that, could solve a lot of problems, including these subjectivity questions that you're asking, because maybe when you compare the experiences that we have with the experiences that extraterrestrials have, maybe you would finally come to the maybe even solve the great philosophical problem of objective knowledge. One of the big questions is
Yeah,
how objective is our knowledge. It's an epistemological and metaphysical question. How
yeah.
how objective is our knowledge? Well, what if we made contact with extraterrestrials and compared our knowledge? Wouldn't that be interesting to see? maybe
Fascinating.
then maybe then you would start to actually build what you could call objective knowledge. This interconnected network of knowledge could really be something that's more objective than what we have now.
We would certainly know the universe much more profoundly if we can figure out that the knowledge is objective. Yeah, absolutely. But and at the same time, what we're doing is we're acknowledging that all knowledge that we have is subjective.
Well, in that sense, if you look at it in that broad of a sense,
Yeah.
that's right. We just don't know. We don't know what we don't know, and
And we don't know Jack.
that's right. Possibly. Right.
It's exciting. Sorry, I know we're almost running out of time, but I do want to ask you a couple of things. There's one thing that kind of struck me in learning your story too, because you said, where are you here? Oh, your dissertation. Let's go way back a little bit, because this is one lesson that you gave me. You said that you wanted to study, or your dissertation was on the history of the ET life debate.
That's right.
What were you told when you communicated that was your dissertation?
Well, this was way back in the 70s.
Yeah.
This was in a history of science department at Indiana University. And I was told, well, there's two problems with that in the history of science department. One is that it's not science, the whole extraterrestrial life thing. And secondly, it has no history that's worth writing about. So I actually had to change advisors, and my advisor became a medievalist who knew there was this tradition, at least in the Middle Ages, and actually going back even further than that. Tradition was what was called the plurality of worlds, and so he took me on, And my dissertation then was on the plurality of worlds debate from Democritus, the ancient Greeks, to Kant in the mid 18th century. And that was 50 years ago. And I've been writing about the history of extraterrestrials ever since. And a lot of other people have joined me now. So I think back then they just had a bit of a parochial idea of what history of science was.
Well, again, the advice you told me, the advice you give students is never to accept no to your dissertation.
That's right. Don't always believe if you think you have a subject that's important and you're passionate about, don't let an advisor talk you out of it. Do whatever you have to do to study that subject. And that's general advice I give to everybody, including my grandkids, is find something passionate, find something that you're passionate about, and take that for your life's work. You don't just want to have a job; you want to have a passion. And the trick is to get paid for doing work that you're passionate about.
That's the great trick. That's the great trick. Well, so let me dovetail into one of the last few things here, because you said to me something else that I had to write down. You were referring to scientists today versus scientists in the past, and you said we've gotten a lot more stovepiped as we've gotten on. You remember telling me that?
I don't remember saying that.
Yeah.
I think what I must have meant if I said that is that we've become more and more specialized. And one of the great things about astrobiology is it's not so stovepipe, which I mentioned as we started.
Yeah.
We can talk about biology, chemistry, and astronomy, and the social sciences and humanities, and in a really deep way. And this is quite unusual and in science, probably still in many of the sciences. Although I think they're beginning to realize that humanities and social sciences have a lot to add to the conversation. For example, with the Human Genome Project, they had a huge ethical, legal, and humanistic aspect to that, where they talked about the implications. And no matter what science you're talking about, it's important to talk about the societal implications. And even when I was the NASA historian, we initiated a project and a book series on the societal implications of spaceflight. So I think it's important, people pay for scientific research. So it's important that we not only tell them the results, but what the implications are, whether it's the Human Genome Project or whether it's the search for aliens or whatever. So I think we are in that sense becoming less stovepipe than we used to be.
For me, as a father of two kids who are moving into the sciences, I think as part of their career, it's comforting to know that in science, scientism is not so strong as it was perhaps when you were a budding scientist. And that's why I asked that question early on about the European Space Agency versus their philosophy on studying astrophysics or astrobiology versus the US at the time. And that's why I need to ask. Oh, and as well, I want to add, we had two scientists from Europe early on in the podcast, very early on, Max Katikala and Megan Christian, who both spent a year-long program in Antarctica as scientists for the European Space Agency.
Uh-huh.
So we had an interesting conversation with both of them, separate conversations. Maybe I shouldn't ask you. I should have asked them, why is the space agency sending you down to Antarctica? But let's pretend I didn't ask you that. Where do you think, or how do you think you exist after your body passes away?
I don't believe we do exist after the body passes away. Not as a biological entity, but what I would say, I mean, in a way, the Bible was right. Dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. My mantra is stardust thou art, and into stardust thou shalt return, because we know that the elements our body are made of came from the stars. They were generated inside the stars. And when we die, into stardust we shall eventually return. So that's my take on that.
Does your personality, do you believe that your personality or anything apart from your biological material live on?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Okay. No, I'm just curious to know. Curious to know this. Last question then. I told you, I promise, right? So last question. What is greatness to you?
Greatness. Well, let's see. That's an interesting question. Well, I think greatness would be not only the increase and diffusion of knowledge. I mean, if you were talking about greatness in terms of how you spend your life, the increase and diffusion of knowledge, but also making humanity better than it was before you got here. I think if that was the goal of everybody, we'd be a greater planet full of humans than otherwise. So I would say, one of the drivers for my life has been the increase and diffusion of knowledge, which is the sort of motto of the Smithsonian Institution, where I was for a little while. But also to be kind to people and make humanity better than it has been in the past.
Like that answer. Lovely. Steve, thank you again for your time and for a little bit of education here today. I learned quite a bit. Thank you for all the and thank you for providing definitions too as a backdrop to the conversation. It's very cool. Very cool of you to be on.
Great talking to you. Good luck.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today? Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and share with your friends. And consider donating to help us produce more great conversations at behindgreatness.org/donate. Until next time.